Okay, we're going to have a little look at the prep work, and what we're going to look at is top stitching along the shaped edge of both your rear card slot and your main exterior panel. Now, normally when we would top stitch, we would start right at the side and then go all the way across, going up and down all those little curves. In this instance, we're not going to. Where we're going to start is here at this top corner of that first curve. So we're not going to be doing that straight edge on the end. We're not going to be doing that straight edge at the other end either. We're going to stop here at this corner, and we're going to stitch at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now I like to use my zipper foot. I have a Teflon zipper foot, which works really well. It means I can actually see exactly where I'm stitching. I'm stitching at 1/8 of an inch from that top edge. I'm going to move you just a little bit closer so you can kind of see where I'm going. And I'm leaving long threads at the beginning and the end so that I can bury and tie off my threads. Now you can see I've actually got different colour in the bobbin, so you can see well that there are two different colours there. So there's pink and then there's white. Pink being the top stitching, the stitching that's going to be seen on the outside. So I'm going to start about 1/8 of an inch away from that corner where I wanted to start, and I'm just going to place my needle into my faux leather, and I do go really slowly. I've reduced my stitch length down to just over 3. If you keep your stitch length really long for this, you'll find that you get kind of a jaggedy look up to your line. It won't be curvy, it'll be angled because the stitch is quite long. So although I usually say that, you know, top stitching, you need to do a longer stitch, on this occasion using a slightly shorter stitch is actually better, because you want it to be a nice curved line of stitching. So go stitch by stitch and literally just move your fabric around as you need to. I'm using a size 14 universal needle. I don't ever use a leather needle for faux leather because there's a clue in the name. A leather needle is for leather, not for faux leather. It has a blade at the bottom which is designed to cut through the fibres of real leather, and real leather will sort of heal almost around the holes that your needle cuts. Faux leather obviously isn't made of fibre, isn't fibrous because it's not skin, and therefore will not heal around those cuts. It will just eventually perforate, which isn't something you want really. So we're now just going to carry on going all the way around. All of those curves, 1/8 of an inch away from the curves. And when I get to the end, I'm just going to lift my needle, pull my work out, and trim off my threads so that I've got long threads. Let's just move you back again. So now I have long threads at the beginning of my work and long threads at the end of my work. So I'm going to take my self-threading needle, and I'm going to, you can use any needle for this, it's just I like self-threading needles. Take the thread from the front of my work, thread it onto my needle, go back through the very first hole So you're not creating any double stitching, no double thickness of stitch, and take it so that the threads are both on the back of the work. Do exactly the same on the other side. Now the reason we don't go right to the edge of this panel when we're stitching is because we're going to make holes in the edge of this panel, and we don't really want to make holes through our stitching, because then our stitching will unravel. So we're keeping our stitching out of the line where our holes will be. So here we go. Now I've got both of my threads on the back of my work. I think you can see that. I think there's a white one and there's a pink one. And what we're going to do is we are just going to, we would do if I didn't have such fat fingers anyway. Here we go, we're going to tie them off. So I'm just doing a couple of small knots. And what you end up with is a tiny little knot on the back of your work. It's not enough to worry about. And I'm going to trim off those threads down to about ½ an inch, I guess. Now, if you've got a glue stick, and I don't know what I've done with mine, you can just use a little tiny bit of Pritt stick, glue stick or whatever, just to glue those ends down so that they don't sort of come adrift. I'm just using Fabri-Tac because I can't find my glue stick. I've put it in a safe place. Who knows? It'll probably come to light when I least expect it now. And we're going to do the same at the other end. Now we are going to use this method almost exclusively throughout this pattern. So I'm not going to show you every time. I'm just going to say, and now you're going to tie off your thread ends, tie off and bury your thread ends. So you're going to use the same technique all of the time. We don't do a lot of stitching in this pattern. Mostly it's cutting and braiding. So there we go. I'm going to pop that one out of the way and let that glue dry. And don't put it face down on something, because you'll basically end up with it glued to something else. But you can't actually see it because it's in pink, but I have a line of top stitching that goes all the way along the top. I have already done my rear card slot, but what I'm going to do now is the work that we need to do on this piece, which is your back. Let's find a ruler. Is your money slot. So let's just get very organised. Where's my Frixion pen? Got it. Right. At the top of your panel, now obviously it depends on you where you want your which way up you want your panel. But at the top of your panel, you're going to make a mark on the wrong side that is ½ an inch from the top edge. So along that long straight edge. These are the sides. This is either the top or the bottom, whichever way you want it up. And I'm going to use glue again. You could use double-sided tape if you want to, but you need to use the type of tape that is suitable for quilters, so you can stitch through it. So I haven't got any of that. I've only got ordinary double-sided tape, which you can't stitch through. You'll end up with your needle being all gummed up. So I'm just going to pop a little drop of glue on, and we're going to do this using glue. I'm going to grab some clips and just let the glue dry off just for a second or two, because it becomes more tacky then. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to fold that raw edge over so that it touches that line that we made, and I'm just going to clip it in place. So I'm folding the faux leather wrong sides together to create a ½ inch hem at the top of my work. So if you use double-sided tape, you may not need to do clips, but with glue, I just find it's a lot easier to do clips and then let it dry before you try and stitch it. But because this is only a ½ inch hem, using the standard double-sided tape just means you'll end up stitching through the double-sided tape, which means you'll end up with a gummed up needle, because most of the non sort of sewing specific double-sided tapes will do that. They're not designed to be sewn through. I think Collins is a good one that is designed to be sewn through. So once your glue is dried, and I'm not going to leave my glue to dry because you don't really want to sit waiting while I wait for it to dry, we're going to top stitch along this top edge. Now I like to do 2 lines of top stitching, so because we've only got 1/4 of an inch on the other side, I do my first line at 1/8 of an inch from the top edge, and I do my second line literally just underneath, so it's a 1/16 of an inch below that, just to get 2 lines of stitching, just because I think it looks neat and tidy. However, you do not need to do 2 lines of stitching. Remember, what we said about before was that we're not going to start right at the beginning of our panels. So again, we're going to start 3/8 of an inch in from this side, and we're going to finish 3/8 of an inch in from this side. Now you can mark that if you want to. I tend to do it by eyeballing. See, my eyeballing is pretty good at that now. And again, I'm not going to backstitch the beginning. I'm leaving long threads just to make sure that I've got enough to be able to tie off. Again, I'm using my zipper foot to make sure that I'm nice and close to that edge. Just abandoning my clips in the middle of my sewing machine throat. Which is pretty standard, and then I complain when they're on the floor. But that's where they usually end up because I tend to sweep them off with my hand. Now, if you wanted to make a mark that would, to show you where the 3/8 of an inch is, then that's fine, you can do. I generally don't, I do eyeball it, I'm happy to admit that. So my second line of stitching, which I will do just before I do any of the tying off. I'm just literally going to start at the same place, 3/8 of an inch in, and I'm just going to stitch just below that first line of stitching, leaving long threads to start and finish because I don't want any back stitch threads. I'm using my first line of stitching as a guide, which is actually quite difficult to see on this faux leather because it is quite jazzy, but I can see it, and I'm using that as my guide for where I'm actually doing my second line of stitching. Now, I don't know if you can see that on the back of there, but that's 2 lines of stitching, and that's holding that beautifully down. So now I'm just going to bury my threads on the front of my work, or from the front of my work through to the back of my work. And we're going to do exactly the same as we did before, in so much as we're going to tie them off and just glue them down just to make sure they don't poke out anywhere. This is something you kind of get used to after a while. I do it for most of my patterns where I'm using faux leather because I think back stitching not only looks unattractive, but it's actually, it just weakens your fabric. Whereas just to bury, it takes 2 seconds to bury threads, and actually once you're used to doing it, it becomes almost second nature. I tend to do it sometimes when I don't need to. There are occasions when I could cheerfully not do it ever again, but for the most part, I don't actually think about it anymore. I just do it. Good habit to get into, I think. It's a technique that comes from quilting, because quilters don't like to have big lumps of double threads on the front of their work. Of where they've backstitched, they don't backstitch, they tend to bury their threads because it looks more attractive. And there we go, that's that one prepped as well. So I will come back to you and we will start with our construction.